Hey, 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 hey. I think this is when everyone really started to recognize, wait a minute, like Deftones is kind of like sex metal. I want to be in that school rocking out with Deftones. I could listen to that drum intro just over and over again. Deftones, the most goddamn iconic band in the universe. Well, at least for me anyway. But what makes Deftones so iconic? Well, it has to have something to do with how cool Chino looks, right? The baggy pants, the oily hair, it's back in. But beyond that, what makes them so iconic is the consistent quality of their music across 30 years. From the raw, aggressive energy of Adrenaline with tracks like Bored and 7 Words, to White Pony, the album where they truly carved out their own unique sound. And most recently, Private Music, where they bring heavy grooves back to the forefront on tracks like Milk of the Madonna and Infinite Source. Deftones weren't an overnight success, and not all their albums are fantastic, but put simply, what makes Deftones so iconic is their music. So today we're going to be doing a deep dive. We'll be ranking albums. I don't like these albums. They're both kind of shit, honestly. Touching on some real defining moments of their career. This is realistically where that quintessential Deftones sound just got cemented into stone. Highlighting some iconic collaborations that they've done. Some context to my review is that I think there is old Deftones fans and new Deftones fans. My fiance is what I would classify a new Deftones fan, and myself, I am an old Deftones fan. I got into them around 1998, 1999, right between that Around the Fur and White Pony period. So the entire context of this entire tier list review comes from that entry point of getting into Deftones. The ranking categories that I've set up for this is No Skips, which is your S tier, Amazing Album, which is your A tier, Great Album, which is the B tier, Amazing Tracks, but an average album, which is the C tier, and Kind of Shit, honestly, which is the D tier. And how I'm going to be reviewing things is by my favorite albums to my least favorite albums. So the first album that I would put as just a 100% no skip, 10 out of 10, absolutely banging album is Around the Fur. And this is an interesting album for me because it wasn't really seen for the modern day classic that it's seen for now. They were just kind of an up and coming metal. People were kind of like, did they go in new metal? The album slapped, but it wasn't until I just kept going back to this album year after year after year where I honestly only recently just realized that, holy shit, I actually think this is a 10 out of 10 album. There are literally no skips on this album. And I think the key to any 10 out of 10 album realistically is the deep cuts. Beyond the classics like My Own Summer Shove It, Around the Fur, and Be Quiet and Drive, you've got amazing deep cuts like Labia, even Mascara, which have just aged so surprisingly well because you think these kind of droning guitars with Chino just moaning over the top, you'd think surely that's going to fade off into irrelevancy, but people love it just as much now as they did previously. Production-wise, this album really kind of set the standard in regards to how a lot of people wanted their drum sound to be. You can hear in Around the Fur, we were literally just obsessed with this, with the iconic Terry Date, who I think produced this. Let's have a look. Yeah, produced by Terry Date. But the album still definitely has a rawness to it, especially in comparison to modern day rock records. It sounded just real to what these guys are, and I think that's a lot of the appeal to Deftones and why they've withstood the test of time is the fact that they just have their own unique sound. One massively underrated song on this album, I think, is Head Up. And I think it's underrated because there is a little bit of real full new metal energy coming in at this point with the rapping. And the guest vocalist of Max Cavalera. And by the way, I remember like the screaming Soulfly in the middle of this track, in the chorus of the track. And people have to remember that this song was released, right when Max Cavalera had left Sepultura, and he hadn't started Soulfly yet, and he was screaming Soulfly in this song, I assume because he was trying to shout out his new band. The absolute classic track from the album is Be Quiet and Drive. Another song that at the time, if you were a Deftones fan, you absolutely loved it, but it wasn't like the absolute freak out classic that it is today. It's been weird kind of watching that whole thing kind of develop around the song. I mean, you can see here on Spotify alone, it's got over 480 million views just on Spotify. That's crazy. So all that having been said, Around the Fur goes in the S tier, no skips. The second album that I would put in the S tier, no skips, and I've thought long and hard about this because I was like, where does this album actually go? And I'm talking about Diamond Eyes. I remember when this album came out in 2010, it was right off the back of when Chi died, and there was this kind of narrative around the release where it was like the band's kind of united again. I think some context around that as well is that as much as like White Pony and stuff were really seminal albums for them, apparently there was a lot of infighting going on in the band at that stage between like Chino trying to bring in this softer energy, and you've just got Steph Carpenter just going crazy with his Meshuggah influenced riffs as well. Enter Diamond Eyes, there was this narrative in the media that it was like the band is united again. When the album came out, I wasn't like, this is like the best shit in the world. I was like, there's some absolutely standout tracks on there like Diamond Eyes. At the time, I really loved You've Seen the Butcher. I think this is when everyone really started to recognize, wait a minute, like Deftones is kind of like sex metal. And that essentially inherently brings in a whole bunch of female listenership. When I go back and listen through this album now, I'm like shocked that when I go through it, I'm like, there's actually no skips on this album, and the high points on the album are really, really strong. As time's kind of gone on, songs like Sex Tape have gone on to be some of their most popular songs. The heaviness on this album, I feel like, isn't lost, and I think that's probably the part where Deftones have struggled to kind of maintain throughout their career, is that not all their heavy songs hit as hard as each other. They don't get that balance right. The production on this album for me is a little bit too digital sounding. I think the best Deftones albums production-wise for me have really nice natural sounding drums that are really big, and the guitars don't have that super digital edge that sometimes Steph Carpenter's guitars can have. So yeah, Diamond Eyes in the no skips S tier, and that's even a surprise to me because I would have thought up until recently I would have kind of put it in and around that kind of A tier level, but S tier for me, it goes. Okay, the next album I want to talk about is White Pony. And this one was a massive point of contention for me because I was like, impact-wise on me personally and impact-wise in the band's discography, I think this is probably, their most important album. This was the album where there was a whole bunch of new metal shit going on. They could have been thrown into the new metal stuff, but to their credit, they just really carved out their own niche at this point. That having been said, there are actually 2 songs on the album in particular that I just don't like. And for that reason, I can't put it on the S tier because S tier for me has to have a whole bunch of really high moments, but there's got to be no skips. So even though White Pony is probably their most important album, I can't deny the fact that I'm skipping 2 songs in this. This is realistically where that quintessential Deftones sound just got cemented into stone. Another absolute classic, and no matter how many times I listen to this, I just never get sick of the song. I think that if one song would have to be the quintessential Deftones song, it would have to be Change in the House of Flies. Passenger, which features Maynard James Keenan from Tool on vocals. I remember at the time, again, this was like proper internet. Internet was around, it wasn't like a huge thing. I remember there was just like talk about, oh, you know, it's such like a sensual song, and they're talking about like having sex in the back of a car and stuff. A super sensual album, but also some absolute fucking bangers with the heavier tracks on this album as well, with songs like Street Carp. And Pink Maggot was my depressive song that just hugged me when I felt really, really sad for that period of my teenage years where, you know, you're just sad, mate. You know, you don't know what's wrong. I always say when I was a teenager, I was like, I didn't know what my parents didn't understand or what other people didn't understand, but I know that they just didn't understand. They did not understand. You gotta love a sad song. And honestly, I don't count the Back to School Mini Maggot remix because it wasn't on the original album. And I've heard stories about how essentially the record labels was just pushing them to release that because, like I said, there's a whole bunch of rap rock going on at this stage. They deliberately went away from it. The label was just like, no, you gotta do rap rock. So they did it. Still a sick song. And the video clip for that just fucking spoke to me so hard. I was like, I want to be in that school rocking out with Deftones. But the issue with this album and the reason why it doesn't get in S tier is because of two tracks in particular. Firstly, Korea. Like these vocals in the verse, and it doesn't get any better in the chorus. And funnily enough, I'm not a big fan of the first track on the album. Don't know how to pronounce it. Okay, maybe I can come around to that song a little bit, but you could argue that it should go back up in S tier because there are so many high points on the album. The high points like all the way up here. Fuck, maybe I should still put it up there, but I do have the S tier for me is no skips, and it has a skip in it. I'm sorry. Moving on to the next album that I feel like goes in the A tier. And this was a surprising one for me because for a few years there, I was legitimately like, this is their worst album. As of recently, I've come back around to it, not just because the songs are great, but I actually think it's their best or second best sounding album production-wise. And that is Saturday Night Wrists. When I first heard this album, I was in my second year of university in 2006, and it didn't completely blow me away when it first came out, but I loved it. I was like, fuck yeah, great album. And then, like I said, I kind of went off a little bit because I guess I just kind of perceived it to be a little bit of, it was very reverby. They were really pushing into that Team Sleep style thing that Chino was doing as a side project around the similar time. But as time's gone on, I've actually realized that this is pretty much almost a perfect album with only really one or two skips on it. There was a certain point there where I kind of associated this album with being a soft album, but some of Deftones' best heaviest songs are on this album. Like, I could listen to that drum intro just over and over again. Like Abe, man, like his groove on some of these tracks. This track, Mian, also featured Surge from System of a Down. And upon trying to do some research into this, I discovered that this song flopped as a single, but that doesn't stop me from loving it. Rapture again with Abe just killing the drums. Again. And then obviously, you know, some of their most well-known songs are off this album with Beware, Cherry Waves. The sleeper track on this album, buried all the way down at number 11 on the track list, Kim Dracula. The fucking gall to put this at track 11. Literally one of the best Deftones songs. I just think production-wise, the drums sound really natural and the guitars don't have that harsh tone to them. Sometimes Deftones albums can just have this really weird mid-range and like the bottom end just kind of feels a little bit out of whack. But there are a couple of songs on here that I skip, which is why it's in A tier. Combat being one of them. Can't get around Combat. Ruts as well. I just think it's just a little too hectic for me. So yeah, I skip those, which is why this goes to the A tier. But still, honestly, a fantastic album. An A tier is not a bad album by any means. You know this. You know this. Okay, now we're moving on to the albums that I would consider to be great albums, but not amazing albums. And the next album in particular, I don't actually necessarily think it's even an average album. I think it's like almost every song on the album I love, but just the high points on the album don't take me as high as the other points. Actually, now I'm looking at this, tier list, it does feel weird putting Saturday Night Wrists on the same level as White Pony. It just feels weird. All right, I'm putting White Pony up to S tier. I'm putting White Pony up to S tier. I know I said that S tier has to be no skips, but the album is too iconic. It has too many like high moments. So I'm going S tier on this, but look, given how I feel, I guess it could go back down to A. But for this, it's on S tier. Back to these great albums that aren't bad by any measure, but they're just not quite on the tier of the other four that I would consider to be above it. The first one is the Deftones self-titled album. Which I would largely consider to be their probably most underrated album, in my opinion. Like, you can just have a look at the streams here. The streams aren't hugely high and there's no like massive standout stream numbers there. This has some absolute classics on it, like Minerva, obviously, Needles and Pins, just again with that Abe groove. Abe with the groove. Other classics, Death Blow, absolutely beautiful song to listen to. Soon as you came in, this album here, I would almost say, doesn't have any skips. And you might be saying, well, why isn't it up here on the no skips then? And I think it's just because the high points of the album do not hit as hard as the hardest hitting songs off the other albums. I said it. The other album that I'm putting on the great album tier is their first album, Adrenaline. I would say this goes into this tier for almost like a different reason to self-titled. I would say that the album has better classics on it, like Bored, Engine Number 9, 7 Words. Squeal like a pig when you There's a lot of songs on this album that aren't bad by any means. The lower points on the album, I think, are a little bit lower than the albums above it, I guess is how I would put it. It has some amazingly high moments as well, which is what makes it, I think, kind of like a different album to the self-titled album. But funnily enough, it still kind of puts them squarely in the middle of great album, not a bad album by any measure, but just not as good as the ones above it. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting because particularly with this album, No Yokan, some of my favorite Deftones songs ever are on this album. But the album as a whole, it's an average album. It's just an average album as a whole. But the fact that there were 7 albums in and coming out with songs like Entombed and Rosemary and Tempest and Swerve City. And in my opinion, their best sounding album production wise. The drums are super clear, guitars are super clear without being harsh. Everything just kind of sits at a nice level for me. And this album is actually my fiance's favorite album because of songs like Entombed. This chorus, absolutely beautiful. But the reason why this does get ranked all the way down here, again, I wouldn't necessarily say this is a horrible album, but just in regards to consistency from track to track, I would say that there's 5 or 6 songs on this album which are amazing songs, but that still leaves kind of half of the album that just has me a little bit like, I don't really like listening to this. Another album which I feel like fits in that same category of about 5 to 6 songs that I really like and the rest of the album that I reckon I could leave is their newest album, Private Music. Honestly, a bit of a return to form for these guys because you can see from here, obviously I'm going down the tier list and there's only 2 albums left, and a good time to have a return to form because they've really just started to gain a whole bunch of new listenership over the last couple of years. The 2 albums before this, honestly, in my opinion, were kind of trash. If they were to release another trash album at this point, I really feel like it would impact their legacy a little bit, but they've come back with a really strong album. Again, this album for me isn't a perfect album, but there are a good 5, 6 songs on this album which I think are killer. A couple of them is My Mind is a Mountain, Infinite Source. Hey. Yeah, that song is fucking killer. Abe, again, coming in with this absolute killer groove in Milk of the Madonna. Abe. And there are a couple of other songs I like beyond that as well, but after that, to me, the album falls off a bit, which is why it comes in at the C tier, which still honestly isn't bad. And how many albums are we talking in here now? 10 albums in, and you're still releasing C tier albums? Honestly, go and see Metallica 10 albums in. Go and see AC/DC 10 albums in. Go and see any band 10 albums in. You're not going to see Tool get 10 albums in because they only release one album every 10 years. And that leaves us to the last 2 albums, which honestly I'm just going to put here up at once because they both could practically just be each other. They're kind of shit, honestly, these albums. And I've tried to go back to them and listen to them and be like, you know what, maybe I was in a bad mood when I listened to this album. Maybe I need to give it another shot. And then I go back and listen to it and I'm like, no, I don't like this. And then kind of going to sleep like that, kind of, I'm drifting off into the distance. And I try that as well and I don't like it. I don't like these albums. They're both kind of shit, honestly. And that's the end of the tier list. Please like and subscribe. I'm going to be releasing a lot of content on YouTube. At the moment, it is predominantly shorts because that is the nature of content and particularly being a new content creator. But let me know what you want me to do a tier list of next. Bye-bye.